The morning sun illuminated the windows of the yellow house in New Haven, a small town in rural Virginia. Louisa, a 12-year-old girl with curly hair and observant eyes, packed her father's bags while balancing her weight on crutches. Her brother Peter, just 7 years old, ran through the backyard chasing a golden beetle, oblivious to the importance of that day. "Dad, I put your medicine in the side bag just like you asked," Louisa said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Her leg, in a cast after a fall from the backyard tree 2 weeks ago, still hurt, but she hid the discomfort. Robert, a man whose hands were calloused from construction work, smiled tenderly at his daughter. At 38, his face bore the marks of someone who had known the weight of responsibilities from an early age. Widowed 3 years prior, he had found a new chance for his family in Deborah. The marriage, celebrated just 6 months ago, seemed to bring back the harmony that had been missing from that house since the passing of Martha, his first wife. "Daughter, I don't know what I'd do without you," Robert said, pulling Louisa into a hug. "I know I'm asking a lot, leaving like this with your leg still injured, but this project in Richmond is the opportunity we've been waiting for." Louisa smiled, hiding the apprehension she felt. "It'll all be fine, Dad. It's only 3 months. Deborah will take care of us." In the kitchen, Deborah prepared coffee. Tall, impeccably dressed, and with calculated movements, she maintained a cordial smile as she watched her husband and stepdaughter through the window. The 35-year-old woman had won Robert over with her determined demeanor and promises of stability. To the town, she was a lucky woman for having found a hard-working man like Robert. For Robert, he was the lucky one to have an educated and elegant woman by his side. "Peter, come have breakfast. Your father is about to leave," Deborah called, her melodious voice echoing through the backyard. The boy ran in, his dark hair disheveled and his hands dirty with soil. Deborah frowned for an instant, but quickly regained her serene expression. "Wash your hands first, darling." At the table, breakfast proceeded with apparent normality. Robert went over the final instructions, worried about every detail. "Louisa has an orthopedic appointment next week. I left the bus fare and the referral in my nightstand drawer. Peter needs to take cough syrup every night. Their school—" "Robert," Deborah interrupted with a calm smile, placing her hand over his. "We've already discussed all of this. You can rest easy. I'll take care of them as if they were my own children." On the porch, Mrs. Zulmira, the neighbor who had lived next door for over 30 years, watered her ferns while observing the activity. The 68-year-old woman had known Robert since he was a boy and had watched Louisa and Peter grow up with the affection of a grandmother. When Martha passed away, she was the one who helped care for the children while Robert worked. Deborah's arrival had lessened her involvement in the family's life, but Mrs. Zulmira kept a watchful eye on that house. "Good morning, Robert. Leaving already?" she asked, approaching the fence that separated the yards. "Good morning, Mrs. Zulmira. Yes, the bus leaves at 10. Will you keep an eye on the children from time to time?" "Of course, my dear." "You can count on it." Deborah approached, wrapping an arm around Robert's waist and waving to the neighbor. "Don't worry, Mrs. Zulmira, everything is under control." The elderly woman nodded, but her experienced gaze caught something in Deborah's smile that caused her a slight discomfort. The time for farewell arrived too quickly. At the bus stop, Robert hugged his children tightly. "Peter, obey your sister and Deborah, all right? No climbing trees like your sister did," he joked, ruffling the boy's hair. "Okay, Dad," Peter replied, trying to hold back tears. When he turned to Louisa, Robert noticed the concern in his daughter's eyes. He knelt to her height even with his crutches. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Nothing, Dad, just—" "Will you text every day?" "Every single day," he promised, kissing her forehead. "Take care of your brother, but let Deborah handle the responsibilities of the house, okay? You're still a child, you need to rest that leg." Louisa nodded, swallowing the lump that formed in her throat. Robert then turned to Deborah, embracing her tenderly. "Thank you for taking on all of this. I promise that when I return we'll have that honeymoon we couldn't take." "Don't worry," she replied, kissing him softly. "We'll be fine." The bus departed, leaving a cloud of red dust in the air. As they waved, Louisa felt Deborah's fingers squeeze her shoulder with unnecessary force. When she looked up, she saw that her stepmother's smile had changed. It was no longer the warm smile she showed her father, but something different, colder, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying close attention. "Let's go home," Deborah said, already walking ahead. "We have a lot to organize." On the way back, Peter held his sister's hand tightly. "Lou, is Dad really coming back?" "Of course he is, silly. It's only 3 months." But as she watched Deborah walk ahead of them, Louisa felt a shiver run down her spine. Something told her that these would be the longest 3 months of their lives. The sky, once clear, now began to close in, announcing an approaching storm. Upon arriving home, Deborah locked the door and turned to the children. Her face had completely transformed. There were no more smiles, no more kindness. Her eyes, once affectionate, now displayed a coldness Louisa had never seen. "Now it's just the 3 of us," the stepmother said, taking off her high heels and placing them neatly by the door. "And there are some new rules in this house." At that moment, Louisa knew that life as they knew it had ended with the departure of the bus that had taken her father. What she didn't know was that the nightmare that was beginning would only be the start of a journey that would test her limits and forever transform her family's destiny. The first week without Robert was a prelude to what was to come. Deborah established a new regime in the Yellow House, with strict rules that transformed the once welcoming environment into a hostile and oppressive space. "From today on, you only enter the kitchen at mealtimes," Deborah announced at breakfast on the second day. "The cupboards will be locked. We need organization in this house." Louisa exchanged a worried glance with Peter, who chewed his bread in silence. The girl tried to argue, thinking of the fruits her brother used to eat between meals. But Deborah, "Peter always eats a banana in the afternoon when he comes home from school." The slap on the table made the siblings jump in their chairs. Deborah's face, previously composed, contorted into an expression of irritation she had never shown in their father's presence. "When I want your opinion, Louisa, I'll ask for it. Is that clear?" The girl nodded, feeling tears burn her eyes. Beside her, Peter cowered in his chair, dropping his bread onto his plate. The changes intensified in the following days. The living room curtains, previously always open to let in the sunlight, remained closed. The television, which had once been a source of fun during cartoon afternoons, could now only be turned on with Deborah's express authorization, an authorization that rarely came. The children's rooms were reorganized. Deborah removed their toys, claiming they caused clutter, and stored them in boxes in the back room. The walls, once decorated with colorful drawings made by Louisa and Peter, were cleaned, leaving only the yellowish paint visible. "We need order and discipline," Deborah repeated, like a mantra justifying each new restriction. At school, the effects were already beginning to show. Peter, normally talkative and sociable, became quiet and withdrawn. His teacher, Denise, noticed the change in the boy's behavior and tried to talk to him during recess. "Peter, is everything all right at home? You've been so quiet these days." The boy looked at his own feet, avoiding the teacher's gaze. "Everything's fine, miss. I just miss my dad." Louisa faced her own challenges. With her leg in a cast, she depended on help for many tasks, but Deborah seemed annoyed by any request. Transportation to school, which Robert had arranged with a neighbor who worked nearby, was cancelled by Deborah after an argument about schedules. "We can't keep depending on other people's goodwill. You'll take the bus like everyone else," she decreed, ignoring the difficulties the girl faced with crutches. At night, the most painful moments were the video calls with their father. Deborah transformed completely during those times, becoming the smiling, attentive woman Robert knew. "Everything's great here. Darling," she would say to her husband while stroking Peter's hair, who had quickly learned to pretend everything was fine. The children are adapting perfectly. Robert, busy with intense construction work, didn't notice his children's apprehensive looks or how Louisa seemed to carefully choose each word. To him, they were just children missing him. "Louisa, how was your orthopedic appointment?" he asked in the second week. The girl hesitated. The appointment hadn't happened. Deborah had cancelled it, claiming she didn't have time to take her but promised to reschedule, a promise she never kept. Before she could answer, she felt her stepmother's fingers tighten on her shoulder. "It was all fine, Dad," she lied, feeling guilty. "The doctor said it's healing normally." After the calls, Deborah always seemed more irritated, as if the effort of maintaining the facade left her exhausted. One night, after talking to Robert, she turned to the children with eyes blazing with anger. "You two to bed. No dinner tonight. I'm tired of looking at those faces." Meals, which had already become scarcer and simpler, were now frequently used as a tool for punishment. Any behavior Deborah deemed inappropriate, a slower response, a toy out of place, even a look she interpreted as defiant, resulted in the withdrawal of a meal. Peter, younger and more fragile, began to show signs of malnutrition. His cheeks, once chubby, had wasted away. His eyes lost their vibrant sparkle. Louisa, desperate to protect her brother, began to save parts of her own food when possible, hiding pieces of bread or fruit in her pockets to give to him later. On a particularly difficult afternoon, when hunger gnawed and Deborah had gone shopping, Louisa decided to take a risk. Limping with difficulty to the kitchen, she tried to open the cupboard where the cookies were kept. It was locked, as she expected. Frustrated, she tried other cupboards, finding them all in the same situation. It was then that she noticed a small fruit basket on top of the refrigerator. Using a broom to reach it, she managed to knock down 2 apples which rolled across the floor. As she bent down to pick them up, she heard the front door open. Her heart pounded. In a panic, she pushed the apples under the stove and tried to get back to her room as fast as her crutches allowed. It wasn't fast enough. "What are you doing in my kitchen?" Deborah's voice, cold as the winter wind, paralyzed Louisa halfway down the hall. The girl turned slowly, feeling her legs tremble. I was thirsty." Deborah's gaze swept across the kitchen, pausing briefly on the misplaced broom handle and the drag marks on the floor. Her eyes, cold as ice, returned to Louisa. "You're lying to me." It wasn't a question. Deborah walked slowly towards Louisa, her heels marking a menacing rhythm on the ceramic floor. When she was close enough, she leaned in, her face inches from the girl's. "I don't tolerate lies in my house." It was then that Peter appeared at the bedroom door, his eyes wide with fear. "Louisa just wanted some water for me." "I'm thirsty." Deborah's gaze shifted to the boy, and something in her expression changed. Not for the better. It was as if a new idea had sprung into her mind, something that made her smile in a disturbing way. "Come here, Peter." The boy hesitated, but obeyed, approaching with hesitant steps. Deborah then looked at Louisa again. "Is that what you want, water? Then let's sort this out right now." Holding Peter's arm with one hand and supporting Louisa with the other, Deborah led the children down the hallway. But instead of going to the kitchen, she headed for the back door of the house. She opened it with a sudden movement, revealing a staircase that descended into darkness. The basement, a space Robert had kept closed for years, ever since a flood had rendered it unusable. The smell of mold and dampness invaded the children's nostrils, causing an immediate sense of nausea. "There's plenty of water down there," Deborah said, her smile now wide. "And that's where you're going, until you learn to respect the rules of this house." Peter's scream was muffled by his stepmother's hand, while Louisa felt a chill run down her spine. At that moment, she knew they had crossed a line from which there might be no return. The basement of the yellow house was exactly like a child's worst nightmares. A damp, dark and suffocating environment, with exposed brick walls where water trickled, forming small puddles on the uneven concrete floor. The low ceiling was crisscrossed by rusty pipes, and the only beam of light came from a tiny transom window near the ceiling, covered in cobwebs and accumulated dust. When Deborah pushed the children down the stairs and locked the door with a dry thud, the silence that followed was broken only by Peter's suppressed sobs. The boy trembled, clinging to his sister's waist, while Louisa tried to maintain her balance without her crutches, which Deborah had confiscated before locking them in. "Lou, I'm scared," Peter whispered, his small voice echoing off the cold walls. Louisa swallowed her own fear, forcing herself to appear strong for her brother. "It'll be okay, Peter. It's just another punishment. She'll open the door soon." But the hours dragged on and the door remained closed. The darkness grew denser as the sun set, until they could barely see a hand's breadth in front of them. The cold of the concrete floor crept up the children's bare feet, settling into their bones like a parasite. Fumbling in the gloom, Louisa found some old crates and remnants of broken furniture. She improvised a seat for herself and Peter, and with a piece of mouldy fabric, tried to make a cushion to ease the pain in her casted leg. "Let's get some sleep," she suggested to her brother, trying to keep her voice steady. "Tomorrow she'll let us out." Sleep, when it came, was restless and intermittent. Louisa woke with every noise, every drop of water dripping from the pipes, every creak of the old house's timber. Peter finally fell asleep in her lap, exhausted from crying and fear. Morning arrived, announced by the timid light filtering through the tiny window. Louisa awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented, until the reality of the basement hit her again. Peter was still sleeping, his forehead hot against his sister's neck. Too hot. "Peter?" Louisa touched her brother's face, feeling the heat emanating from his skin. "Peter, wake up! Are you okay?" The boy slowly opened his eyes, his gaze unfocused. "I'm cold, Lou, and my throat hurts." Panic swelled in Louisa's chest. Peter had always been prone to respiratory infections, and the damp, dusty basement environment was the worst possible scenario. "Deborah!" she screamed, dragging herself to the door and banging with her hands. "Deborah, please." "Peter is sick." No response came. Louisa continued banging and screaming until her voice failed and her hands were red and sore. Exhausted, she slid to the floor, tears of frustration streaming down her face. It was at that moment that she heard a metallic sound at the door. Seconds later, a tray was pushed through a small opening at the bottom, which Louisa hadn't noticed before. On the tray, 2 hard rolls, a piece of cheese, and a bottle of water. "Deborah, Peter is sick. Please let us out!" Louisa shouted at the opening. In response, she only heard her stepmother's footsteps moving away, and then the sound of the television being turned on upstairs. Louisa went back to her brother, sharing the water and trying to get him to eat something. Peter accepted a few sips of water, but refused the bread, complaining of pain when swallowing. The days in the basement began to merge into an endless sequence of darkness and discomfort. Trays of food continued to appear, always with the bare minimum to keep them alive. Sometimes, Louisa could hear Deborah on the phone upstairs, her voice sweet and concerned when talking to Robert. At other times, she caught fragments of conversations with neighbors, explaining that the children were at relatives' houses in the countryside. "I sent them to my brother's farm, you know." Peter had a persistent cough, and the doctor recommended fresh country air, Deborah explained in a melodious voice to someone, probably Mrs. Zulmira, at the front door. Meanwhile, in the basement, Peter's condition worsened. His fever came and went, and a dry cough began to shake his small body. Louisa did her best, using the water from the tray to dampen pieces of cloth and place them on her brother's forehead. As the days passed, she began to explore the basement more, looking for anything that could help them. It was during one of these explorations that Louisa found a rusty nail that had come loose from one of the old boards. The discovery lit a small flame of hope in her chest. Hiding the nail from Peter so as not to alarm him, Louisa began to examine the basement walls more closely. Most were old solid bricks, but in one corner, where the humidity seemed more intense, she noticed that the wall showed signs of deterioration. Determined, she began to scratch the material between the bricks with the nail, working during the hours Peter slept. Her fingers bled from the effort, but the physical pain was more bearable than the anguish of seeing her brother wasting away day after day. On the third night of work, she felt a slight draft coming from the area she was digging. With renewed enthusiasm, she intensified her efforts, ignoring the blisters and cuts on her hands. "What are you doing, Lou?" Peter asked weakly, waking from a restless sleep. Louisa hesitated, but decided he needed hope as much as she did. "I'm making a way for us to get out of here, Peter. I just need more time." The boy's eyes, dull with fever, briefly brightened. "Are we going to see Dad again?" "Yes, Peter, I promise." The hole grew slowly. Louisa discovered that what appeared to be a solid wall was actually an improvised partition, probably built to separate areas of the basement when the house was renovated. On the other side, there was a narrow space that she suspected led to the outside area, near the side garden. On a particularly difficult night, when Peter's cough seemed to tear at his fragile chest, Louisa worked with renewed desperation. Her tears mixed with sweat as she scratched, pushed, and extracted pieces of material from the wall. Suddenly, she felt the nail go completely through, meeting little resistance. The fresh air that invaded the basement was the sweetest scent she had ever smelled. Widening the hole with her fingers, she managed to create an opening the size of her fist, enough to confirm her suspicions. There was an abandoned ventilation duct that led outside. "Peter," she called, her voice trembling with excitement. "Peter, I found a way out." The boy opened his eyes, but his gaze was distant, lost in the fever that consumed his small body. Louisa knew she couldn't wait any longer. Peter's condition worsened with each hour, and she feared what might happen if they didn't get help soon. Determined, she returned to work, ignoring the excruciating pain in her fingers and the exhaustion that weighed on her muscles. When the hole finally reached a size that would allow Peter to pass through, Louisa sat beside her brother, stroking his sweat-soaked hair. "Peter, we need to go now." "Can you get up?" The boy tried, but his legs gave way. The fever had drained his strength, leaving him too weak to walk, let alone crawl through a narrow tunnel. Louisa looked at her own casted leg, and then at her brother. The decision was made before she even had to think about it. With a determined movement, she began to bang the cast against the edge of one of the crates, ignoring the pain each impact caused. "What are you doing, Lou?" Peter asked, alarmed. "I need to take this off so I can carry you," she replied, without stopping hitting the cast. "Don't worry, it'll all be fine." After several minutes of painful effort, the cast began to crack. With her already injured fingers, Louisa tore off pieces until she could free her leg. The pain was intense, but adrenaline and determination kept her focused. "Now let's go," she said, taking a deep breath as she prepared to carry her brother. "I'll pass you through the hole first. Then I'll go." Upstairs, Deborah was on the phone with Robert, her syrupy voice describing an imaginary day in the lives of children who, in her story, were happily playing on a farm that didn't exist. Completely oblivious to the drama unfolding beneath her feet, she laughed at her husband's joke, promising to send more photos of the children the next day, photos she skillfully manipulated using phone apps. In the basement, Louisa prepared for the escape that would forever change her family's destiny. The sky, visible through the small duct, was laden with dark clouds. A storm was approaching, both in the sky and in the lives of those children. The rain fell relentlessly over New Haven, turning the dirt roads into muddy streams. Lightning cut across the sky, momentarily illuminating the drenched landscape as thunder echoed like the roar of a fierce animal. It was the worst storm the region had seen in years, according to residents sheltered in their homes. Through the narrow opening in the basement wall, Louisa could feel the wind and water splashing on her face. The storm made the escape more dangerous, but also offered an advantage. The sound of the rain would cover any noise they made. "Peter, can you hear me? I'm going to pass you through the hole, and you need to wait for me on the other side." "Don't wander off, understood?" The boy nodded weakly, his fever-bright eyes fixed on his sister. He trusted her completely, even in his weakened state. Carefully, Louisa positioned her brother at the entrance of the improvised duct. The space was tight, but Peter was so thin after days of deprivation that his small body slid with relative ease through the muddy tunnel. Louisa pushed him gently, guiding him with words of encouragement. "You're doing great. Peter, just a little more." When she finally managed to pass her brother through, Louisa took a deep breath, preparing for her own crossing. Her leg, freshly freed from the cast, ached intensely, but she ignored the pain. Lying on the damp ground, she began to crawl through the narrow duct, using her elbows and good leg to propel herself forward. The space was even tighter for her, and at several points she felt stuck, panic growing in her chest as she struggled to advance. Pieces of rusty metal scratched her arms and back, but she continued, thinking only of Peter waiting for her on the other side, alone in the rain. After what seemed like an eternity, Louisa felt the fresh night air on her face. With a final effort, she pulled herself out of the duct, falling into a puddle of mud in the house's side garden. The rain lashed her body, but the relief of being outdoors was indescribable. "Peter," she called, looking around desperately. "Here," came the weak reply a few feet away. Louisa crawled to her brother, who was leaning against the outside wall of the house, trembling violently. His skin was warm to the touch despite the freezing rain. "We made it, Peter," she whispered, hugging him tightly. "We got out." But freedom was only the first step. They were in the side garden of the house, soaked and vulnerable. They needed to get away before Deborah noticed their absence. Louisa looked around, trying to orient herself in the darkness. The main street was ahead, but they would have to go around the house to get there. Let's go to Mrs. Zulmira's house, Louisa decided. The elderly neighbor was the only person she trusted to help them. Supporting Peter, who could barely stand, Louisa began the painful walk. Each step sent waves of pain through her injured leg, but she refused to stop. The mud made progress difficult, causing them to slip and fall several times. When they reached the fence separating the properties, Louisa realized with despair that Mrs. Zulmira's house was dark. The neighbor must have traveled to visit her daughter in Richmond, as she usually did monthly. "What are we going to do now, Lou?" Peter asked, his voice almost inaudible under the roar of the storm. Louisa thought quickly. They needed shelter, food, and medical help for Peter. The police station was at least 20 blocks away, too far in their current state. The nearest clinic was closed at that hour. "Let's go to the main street," she decided. "Someone will help us." Supporting her brother's weight, Louisa slowly advanced along the drenched sidewalk. The streetlights, blurred by the heavy rain, created yellowish halos that barely illuminated their path. The streets were deserted, everyone taking refuge from the storm that showed no signs of letting up. After walking 2 blocks, Peter collapsed, unable to continue. Louisa, also at the limit of her strength, sheltered him under the awning of a closed bakery. They sat on the wet ground, huddled together to share what little warmth they had. "Lou, I'm so sleepy," Peter murmured, his heavy eyes closing. "No, Peter. Don't sleep now." Louisa gently shook her brother, fear growing in her chest. She knew by instinct that letting him fall asleep in that state would be dangerous. "Talk to me. Tell me what you're going to do when Dad comes back." "I'm going fishing with him in the river, like before." Louisa continued asking questions, forcing her brother to respond, keeping him conscious while watching the deserted street for any sign of help. Her hope diminished with each passing minute. It was then that they saw headlights. A car approached slowly, carefully navigating the deep puddles that formed on the uneven asphalt. Gathering her last strength, Louisa stood up and waved desperately. "Help! Please, help!" The car slowed to a stop. The driver's door opened, and a tall man got out, shielding his face from the rain with one arm. "My goodness, what are you two doing out here in this storm?" he asked, approaching quickly as he realized they were children. Anthony Foster, 42, was a nurse at the regional hospital and was returning from a 24-hour shift. Exhausted, he drove carefully through the flooded streets when he spotted what he initially thought was a pile of clothes under the bakery's awning. Upon realizing they were children, his professional instinct immediately took over. "My brother is very sick," Louisa explained, tears mixing with the rain on her face. "And our stepmother. She locked us in the basement for days." Anthony didn't need to hear more. Bending down, he quickly examined Peter, noticing the high fever, labored breathing, and signs of dehydration. "He needs to go to the hospital now," he said firmly, lifting the boy into his arms. "Are you too, given the state of that leg?" Louisa hesitated for an instant, the fear of Deborah still present. "She'll find us." "No one will hurt you while I'm around," Anthony promised, his gaze conveying a reassurance Louisa hadn't felt in weeks. "Come, I'll take you to the hospital and call the police." In the back seat of the car, with Peter lying in her lap, Louisa felt such profound relief that she could barely breathe. As Anthony drove quickly through the flooded streets, she recounted in fragmented, tear-choked words what they had endured at Deborah's hands. Listening to the story, Anthony's face hardened, his fingers gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had witnessed many cases of child abuse in his nursing career, but something about the situation of those children affected him particularly intensely. "You're safe now," he repeated, looking at Louisa in the rearview mirror. "I promise you'll be all right." Meanwhile, in the yellow house, Deborah had finally decided to check on the children in the basement. When she opened the door and found no one, her face contorted into a mask of fury and panic. She ran to the hole in the wall, immediately understanding what had happened. For a moment she was paralyzed, calculating her options. Then, with frantic movements, she began to tidy the house, eliminating evidence, preparing to deny everything. At the hospital, the emergency room doors burst open when Anthony entered carrying Peter, followed by Louisa, who was limping heavily. "I need help here." Child with severe pneumonia and probable sepsis. The girl has an untreated open fracture in her leg. The medical team responded instantly to the call from one of their own. Peter was placed on a stretcher, while a nurse helped Louisa sit on another. Doctors worked quickly, connecting monitors, checking vital signs, inserting catheters for medication and hydration. How long were they in these conditions? A doctor asked Anthony. Days, according to the girl. Locked in a damp basement, without medical care, with minimal food. It's a severe case of abuse. The doctor nodded grimly, continuing to examine Peter. I'll notify Child Protective Services and the police. Who did this? The stepmother, Anthony replied, looking at Louisa, who was being attended to by another doctor. And from what I understand, the father knows nothing. He's traveling. While the healthcare professionals fought to stabilize Peter, Anthony sat beside Louisa, holding her hand as the doctor examined her leg. She'll need surgery, the orthopedist diagnosed. The fracture has complicated without proper treatment. Louisa merely nodded, her eyes fixed on the room where Peter was being treated. Nothing else mattered but her brother's recovery. Will he be okay? She asked Anthony, her voice small and fragile. The nurse gently squeezed her hand. We're doing everything we can. Peter is young and strong, despite everything he's been through. He has a good chance. Outside the hospital, the storm continued, but within those walls a light of hope finally began to shine for the siblings. The nightmare under Deborah's hands had ended, but the consequences of her actions were only just beginning to unfold. The New Haven Regional Hospital buzzed with activity that morning. In the pediatric ward corridor, police officers spoke in hushed tones with social workers, while nurses and doctors hurried between rooms. The case of the rescued children had mobilized the entire team, and the news was already spreading through the small town. In room 204, Louisa slowly awoke. The sensation of the soft bed and clean sheets felt almost unreal after days in the basement. Her leg, now properly operated on and immobilized, rested elevated on pillows. Intravenous lines connected to her arm provided medication and hydration. When she fully opened her eyes, she saw Anthony sitting in a chair beside the bed, distractedly flipping through a magazine. "Peter?" was the first word that escaped her parched lips. Anthony looked up, a gentle smile illuminating his tired face. "He's stable. The doctors managed to control the infection, but he's still in the pediatric ICU. They need to monitor him closely." Louisa nodded, feeling tears of relief well up in her eyes. "Can I see him?" "As soon as the doctor clears you to move." "You had surgery and—" A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. 2 police officers entered, accompanied by a middle-aged woman with a compassionate expression who introduced herself as Mariana, from Child Protective Services. "Louisa, I know you've been through a very difficult time," Mariana began, sitting on the edge of the bed, "but we need your help to understand exactly what happened." Over the next hour, Louisa relived the nightmare, recounting in detail Deborah's transformation after her father's departure, the gradual increase in restrictions and abuse, and finally the confinement in the basement. The police officers took notes, occasionally asking questions to clarify specific points. "Were you able to contact my dad?" Louisa asked when she finished her account. The adults exchanged worried glances before Mariana replied, "We're trying, dear. It seems the construction site where he's working is in a remote area with limited communication. But don't worry, we'll find him." What Mariana didn't say was that the police suspected Robert might also be in danger. Initial investigations at the Yellow House had revealed disturbing evidence. In addition to the basement with clear signs of forced confinement, they found in Deborah's room a diary detailing plans to permanently get rid of the children and forged bank transfers from Robert's account to hers. Meanwhile, across town, Deborah was being interrogated at the police station. Sitting in an austere room, her hair disheveled and without the perfect makeup she usually wore, she looked smaller, almost fragile, but her eyes remained cold, calculating. "It was all a misunderstanding," she insisted to Detective Raphael Menzies. "The children were being disciplined, yes, but I never abused them. They exaggerate, they make up stories. Mrs. Deborah, we have forensic evidence from the basement. We found the children's blood, fingerprints on the walls showing desperate attempts to get out. Insufficient and inadequate food remains." Not to mention the state they arrived in at the hospital. The detective pushed photographs across the table, images of Peter unconscious in the hospital bed, connected to various machines. Louisa with her leg in a deplorable state. The basement with the hole in the wall. Blood stains on the concrete floor. I tried to discipline them in the best way possible, Deborah murmured, averting her gaze from the photos. Those children are impossible. They never accepted me as a mother. Discipline? The detective raised his voice for the first time. Do you call hunger, confinement, and medical neglect discipline? The boy almost died of pneumonia. Something in Deborah's face changed. For an instant, the mask of innocence completely fell, revealing an expression that made the detective instinctively recoil. They should never have existed, she whispered, so low he almost didn't hear. Robert was mine, only mine. Those children are constant reminders of her. Her? Martha. The Saint Martha everyone adored. Even after she left, she was still present in that house in the eyes of those children. I just wanted Robert to be entirely mine. The detective signaled to the clerk, ensuring every word was recorded. The confession came so unexpectedly that he almost didn't believe it. Are you confessing that you intentionally abused the children to remove them from Robert's life? Deborah seemed to snap out of a trance, realizing what she had just revealed. It wasn't like that, she quickly retracted. I'm tired, confused. I want my lawyer now. Back at the hospital, Anthony remained by Louisa's side even after his shift ended. There was something about the children's situation that deeply touched the nurse, awakening painful memories of his own childhood. Why are you helping me so much? Louisa asked, curious about the interest of the man who had saved them. Anthony hesitated, carefully choosing his words. When I was about your age, I lost my sister. She was sick and we couldn't get help in time. I'm sorry, Louisa murmured. I became a nurse because of her. I promised I would do everything in my power to ensure no other child went through what she did. He paused, his gaze lost in distant memories. When I saw you and your brother in that storm, I felt like I was getting a second chance, as if somehow I could save my sister through you. The confession created an instant bond between them. Louisa reached out her hand and Anthony held it gently. That afternoon, Louisa was finally allowed to visit Peter. In a wheelchair, pushed by Anthony, she entered the pediatric ICU, her heart aching to see her brother lying in the hospital bed, looking even smaller and more fragile, surrounded by medical equipment. Hey, Peter, she whispered, approaching and touching his hand. It's me, Lou. To her surprise and joy, the boy's eyes slowly opened. A small smile formed on his pale lips as he recognized his sister. We made it, he murmured, his voice hoarse from the tube that had been removed from his throat only that morning. We did, Louisa confirmed, tears streaming down her face. And now we're safe. Where's Dad? Louisa exchanged a glance with Anthony before replying, They're trying to reach him. He'll be here soon. The doctor in charge of the case, Dr. Clara Miller, entered the room with a warm smile. Look who's awake! How are you feeling, Peter? Hungry, the boy replied, eliciting relieved laughter from the adults. That's an excellent sign, the doctor affirmed, writing something on the chart. We'll start with a light meal and see how your stomach reacts, okay? Meanwhile, almost 400 miles away, at a construction site on the outskirts of Richmond, Robert finally received the news. The site supervisor had called him to the temporary office, where a police officer awaited him with a grave expression. Mr. Robert Silver? I'm Lieutenant Campbell, from the New Haven Police Department. We need you to return immediately. There's been an incident involving your children. Robert's world collapsed at that instant. The worst possibilities ran through his mind, as the officer explained the situation in carefully chosen terms, avoiding more disturbing details. They're alive, the lieutenant assured, seeing the panic on the man's face. They're receiving medical attention and are safe now, but they need you. The journey back to New Haven was the longest of Robert's life. Every mile seemed to drag as his mind revisited the past few months, searching for signs he might have ignored, moments when he could have realized something was wrong. The video calls with Deborah and the children, always cheerful and seemingly normal. The daily messages she sent, reporting activities that never happened. The edited photographs showing his children smiling in places they never visited. How could he have been so blind? When he finally arrived at the hospital, it was past midnight. Guided by a sympathetic nurse, he was first taken to Louisa's room, who was sleeping deeply. The sight of his daughter, pale and connected to monitors with her legs suspended in a complex apparatus, made his heart painfully contract. He sat beside her, holding her hand, unable to contain the tears that now freely streamed down his face. This was how Anthony found him, upon returning from a brief coffee break. The two men stared at each other in silence for a moment, until Robert stood up and, without words, hugged the nurse tightly. "You saved my children," he finally said, his voice choked. "How can I thank you?" "No need to thank me. Anyone would have done the same." "No, they wouldn't have," Robert insisted, stepping back to face the man who had become his family's savior. "The detective told me everything. How you found them in the storm. How you stayed by their side all this time. That goes far beyond a nurse's duty." Anthony looked away, uncomfortable with the recognition. "Your children are special, Robert. They're strong, brave. Louisa saved her brother with a determination I've never seen before." At that moment, Louisa began to wake, blinking confusedly until her eyes focused on her father. "Dad!" she exclaimed, trying to sit up. Robert immediately returned to his daughter's side, hugging her carefully so as not to hurt her leg. "I'm here, my little one. I'm here now." Between sobs, Louisa told her father everything they had been through. Robert listened, horror growing with each word, along with a devastating guilt for having left his children in the hands of that woman. "Forgive me, daughter," he pleaded, his voice broken. "How could I not have noticed? How could I have let this happen?" "It wasn't your fault, Dad," Louisa assured, her maturity beyond her years shining through the pain. "She fooled everyone. Even Mrs. Zulmira believed her at first." Later that night, after finally getting to see Peter as well, Robert met Anthony in the hallway. The two men, emotionally and physically exhausted, sat in the uncomfortable chairs of the waiting room. "The detective told me they found evidence." "That she was planning something worse," Robert commented, his voice low so no one else would hear. Anthony nodded grimly. "The important thing is that she didn't succeed. Your children are safe now, thanks to you, and to my daughter's incredible courage." Robert ran his hands over his tired face. "What happens now?" "Deborah will be charged with multiple crimes. The evidence is irrefutable. As for the children, they'll need time, patience, and possibly therapy to process the trauma. But they are young and resilient. With proper support, they can recover completely." Robert looked at the nurse with a new thought forming in his mind. "You've been more than a savior, Anthony. You've been a friend to my children in their worst moment. I would like you to continue to be a part of their lives. Of our lives." The proposal, unexpected and charged with emotion, caught Anthony by surprise. But looking at the doors of the rooms where Louisa and Peter rested, he felt that somehow his path was destined to intertwine with that family's, as if his sister, from somewhere distant, had guided his steps to that stormy night. "It would be an honor," he replied simply. As the night advanced over New Haven, a new family began to form in the aseptic rooms of that hospital, united not by blood, but by something equally powerful, the human capacity to find light even in the darkest situations. 6 months had passed since that stormy night that forever changed the Silver family's life. Autumn had arrived in New Haven, painting the trees with shades of red and gold. As a cool breeze swept through the streets of the small Virginia town, in the courtroom of the municipal courthouse, Judge Maurice Vance adjusted his glasses as he examined the final documents of the case that had dominated the town's conversations for the past semester. The courtroom was packed. Local journalists, curious residents, and all those directly involved in the process occupied every available seat. Louisa, now just turned 13, sat between Robert and Anthony in the front row. Her leg, after multiple surgeries and intensive physical therapy, was almost completely recovered, although she still limped slightly when walking. Beside her, Peter, with his health restored and his cheeks plump again, held a small plush dinosaur, a gift from Anthony on the day he was discharged from the hospital. Across the aisle, Deborah awaited the verdict, head bowed and aged by her time in pretrial detention. Her face, once impeccably made up, now showed lines of expression that made her look decades older. The judge cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. The silence that followed was absolute. After analyzing all the evidence presented, the testimonies of the victims and witnesses, the medical and psychological reports, and considering the defendant's partial confession, this court reaches its decision. Louisa held her breath. In recent weeks, she had attended several sessions with the judicial psychologist, recounting her story so it could be used in the trial. Each interview left her emotionally exhausted, but she never hesitated. For Peter, for herself, and for all other children who might one day face similar situations, she confronted her fears and spoke. This court condemns Deborah Mendez Silva for the crimes of aggravated abuse, unlawful imprisonment, attempted homicide by omission and fraud. The established sentence is 12 years of imprisonment, without eligibility for parole for the first 4 years, in addition to the obligation to reimburse medical expenses and compensate for moral damages to the victims. A murmur ran through the room as Deborah received the sentence without any visible reaction. When the bailiffs approached to escort her back to detention, she finally looked up, meeting Louisa's eyes for a brief moment. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she murmured, almost inaudibly before being led away. Louisa felt a shiver, but also a strange sense of closure. The nightmare was officially over. Deborah could no longer hurt them. Leaving the courthouse, reporters surrounded the family, eager for statements. Robert shielded the children with his arm, while Anthony cleared a path through the crowd. "We just want to start our lives over in peace," was all Robert said before they got into the car and drove away. In the months that followed the rescue, the Yellow House remained closed. Robert couldn't return to that place, laden with painful memories. They had temporarily moved to a small rented apartment while deciding what to do. "What's going to happen to the house, Dad?" Peter asked one night while they were having dinner. Robert sighed, exchanging a glance with Anthony, who now spent most of his free time with them. The two men had developed a deep friendship, united by their love for the children, and shared experiences of loss and overcoming. "I've been thinking of selling it," Robert replied. "Starting over somewhere else." Louisa played with the food on her plate, thoughtful. "You know, Dad, I think I have a better idea." 2 weeks after that conversation, a small gathering took place in the backyard of the Yellow House. Louisa, Peter, Robert, and Anthony welcomed Mrs. Zulmira, Dr. Miller, Detective Raphael, and Mariana from Child Protective Services. An architect was also present, unrolling blueprints on an improvised table. Louisa's idea caught us by surprise, but the more we thought about it, the more sense it made, Robert explained as everyone examined the drawings. "Instead of running from what happened here, let's transform this place into something positive." The project was ambitious, to convert the Yellow House into a support center for child victims of domestic violence. The basement, once a scene of terror, would be completely renovated, walls torn down, large windows installed, abundant natural light. The most impressive thing, the architect commented, was that Louisa insisted on keeping the duct through which they escaped. Of course, it's enlarged and transformed into an illuminated corridor that leads to a sensory garden. "A reminder that there's always a path to freedom," Louisa explained, blushing slightly with everyone's attention, "so that other children know that no matter how dark it seems, there's a way out." Anthony, who had recently requested a transfer from the regional hospital to a closer clinic, would be the health coordinator of the center. His experience with traumatized children, combined with his emotional connection to the project, made him the ideal person for the position. "Initial funding will come from the compensation ordered by the court," Robert explained. "And we already have some local businesses interested in sponsoring the project." Mrs. Zulmira, with tears in her eyes, squeezed Louisa's hand. "If I had been more attentive, maybe you wouldn't have had to go through all that." "You couldn't have known," Louisa consoled. "Deborah fooled everyone. The important thing is that now we're going to turn something terrible into something good." Construction began the following month. Robert, who had found a stable job as a supervisor at a local construction company, personally oversaw every detail of the renovation. The community mobilized. Neighbors showed up on weekends to help. Entrepreneurs donated materials, and even the city council quickly approved all necessary permits. As the house transformed, so did the Silva family. Therapy sessions helped everyone process the trauma and rebuild the bonds damaged by the period of separation. Peter, initially wary of strangers after what happened, began to regain his outgoing personality, especially when Anthony took him fishing in the river on Sundays, an activity that Robert, still overwhelmed with work, couldn't always join. Anthony's constant presence in the family's life gradually evolved into something more significant. What began as gratitude turned into friendship, and eventually into something deeper between him and Robert. The children, far from feeling threatened by this new dynamic, found in it another source of security and love. "Do you mind if Anthony comes to live with us?" Robert asked nervously one night. "Months after the trial. He practically lives here already," Louisa replied with a knowing smile that made her father blush. "Besides," Peter added with the disarming honesty of children, "he cooks much better than you, Dad." The laughter that followed sealed the agreement. That family, forged both by blood and by circumstance, had found its own path to healing. A year after the night of the storm, the New Horizons Shelter Center opened its doors. What was once an ordinary house on a quiet street had transformed into a beacon of hope for vulnerable children. On opening day, a line of authorities and residents awaited to explore the renovated space. Louisa, designated as the official guide, led visitors through the refurbished rooms, explaining every detail with pride. When she reached what was once the basement, now a spacious and bright area with floor-to-ceiling windows and walls colored with children's drawings, many visitors couldn't hold back their emotion. "This is the rebirth room," she explained, her voice clear and confident. "Here children participate in group and individual therapies, learn to express their feelings through art, and find attentive ears for their stories." In a special corner, a small bronze plaque was installed on the wall. Near the corridor that had replaced the escape duct, the door that once hid darkness now opens to light. Peter, who now participated in a therapeutic swimming program developed by Anthony, led tours for visiting children, showing off the children's library and game room with particular enthusiasm. At the end of the ceremony, when most visitors had already left, Louisa found herself alone in the backyard, the same spot where they had emerged on that rainy night. Sitting on a bench under a newly planted apple tree, she watched the sky begin to display the first stars of the night. Anthony found her there, sitting silently beside her. "What are you thinking about?" he asked after a few minutes. Louisa smiled, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "How strange life is. If that hadn't happened, this place would never exist. So many children wouldn't have help." "We don't need bad experiences to do good things," Anthony mused. "But it's true that sometimes the brightest light emerges from the darkest places. Do you think there are many other children going through what we went through?" Anthony hesitated, weighing honesty against protection. "More than we'd like to believe. But now there's one more place where they can find help. And people like you to show them that it's possible to survive and grow stronger." On the other side of the garden, Robert called the two for the small private celebration happening in the kitchen, a cake decorated by Mrs. Zolmira and sodas to commemorate not only the center's inauguration, but also the anniversary of the night that, despite all the pain, had marked the beginning of a new life. As they walked back to the illuminated and welcoming house, Louisa realized that her journey had been like crossing a dark tunnel, painful, frightening, seemingly endless, but that in the end, the light she found was brighter than she could have imagined. A light that she would now help extend to other children still trapped in their own darkness. Upon entering the kitchen and seeing her father, Peter, Anthony, and Mrs. Zolmira laughing and talking, she felt a profound certainty. Family is not defined by blood or by the past, but by love and the choice to walk together, day after day, towards a future that, however uncertain it may be, always holds the possibility of new beginnings. The New Horizons Center quickly became a model for similar institutions in other cities. Louisa and Peter's story, shared with care and respect, inspired changes in public policies for child protection and raised awareness in entire communities about the importance of vigilance and mutual support. For Louisa, who slowly transformed her experience into strength to help others, each child who passed through the center represented a new chance to show that, even in the most desperate situations, courage and hope can open unexpected paths. Like the small hole she had dug in the basement wall, sometimes all we need is a ray of light to show us that there is a world beyond the darkness.